Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and I had a subscriber ask a question of, Jason, would you recommend that people who do more than just lift weights consume more protein than your recommendations? You know, you've got these recommendations that are for bodybuilders, and but what about people who are like football players, MMA fighters, things like that? They're doing a lot more than just weightlifting. Do they need even more protein to gain muscle? So let me put on my +5 hat of weaponsmithing. Let's do a little bit of crafting and let's talk about this for a minute. The short answer, for those who want the Cliff Notes, no, because my recommendations already included those. That's what I was talking about. These were the recommendations that all the experts out there who work with NFL players, Olympic athletes, things like that, that's the protein that they recommend that these people take in when they're trying to actively gain significant amounts of muscle mass, which also means they're trying to gain just a little bit of weight. So they're overeating just slightly, like you think of as clean bulking. And that recommendation is 1 to 1.6 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. So for example, if you weigh 100 kilos, that's about 220 pounds. It's 100 to 160 grams of protein. Now, the longer answer, the reason people ask stuff like this, you always get the stories like, well, people who train hard, don't they need more of this? Don't they need more of that? It'd be like, don't they need more vitamins and minerals, vitamin C, etc.? And the answer is usually no. No, they don't. But as far as this goes, my recommendations already included that. And I also, when I'm talking about bodybuilders, I didn't really say bodybuilders. I said people who are trying to gain muscle mass. There's no need to break it down as a bodybuilder versus a football player. When they're trying to gain muscle mass, they're trying to gain muscle mass as quickly as possible without sacrificing anything else. That's the idea, and their diet should reflect that. They're actively in a hypertrophy phase of their training. Pretty straightforward, and that's interesting because I've get people that have read it the other way when I've gave those recommendations, like, well, that's for athletes. Bodybuilders are trying to gain more muscle than a football player or a boxer or whoever. I'm like, no, they aren't. If they're trying to gain muscle, they're in a hypertrophy phase. The whole idea that a bodybuilder might want to get totally bigger than them is not the point. He's also going to weigh more as he gets bigger, and it's going to adjust accordingly on the scale. But in a hypertrophy phase, your goal is to gain muscle. You're not trying to say, well, I only want to gain a third of the muscle that I should in a hypertrophy phase. Well, then don't do a hypertrophy phase. You're not actively trying to gain serious muscle. So no, they're actually not trying to gain more. Well, they might be trying, but they're not going to be successful. That's the difference. The human body's going to gain the amount of muscle it's going to gain if you're natural at the rate that you can gain it natural. If you're on drugs, it's going to gain it at the rate that you can gain it on drugs. It's not going to go beyond that. So just consuming more protein is not going to facilitate that in any way. You know, people have to consider these things. But the whole idea that because someone does more physical activity that they need more protein, no, it just isn't true. There's no reason to think that. And the other thing to consider, I'm assuming that people who are trying to gain muscle are doing cardio and other activity, because I generally recommend year-round cardio for overall health. Even if someone is dirty bulking to the point of where they're gaining body fat, I would still recommend that they do cardio every day. I do cardio every day. I think it's just critically important. Now, you get a few people who are like, well, Jason, if you do cardio, why do you breathe so heavy? What's wrong with it? You know, you're out of cardiovascular shape. I have a deviated septum, and I don't want to spend $5,000 on the surgery right now to get it repaired and be taken out of being able to do YouTube videos for a week to do that. That's a structural issue with inside my skull. It's nothing to do with being out of shape. I do cardio every day. I'm a big advocate of daily cardio. It's something I can't stress enough for all you guys for overall health, particularly older guys like us getting up in our 30s, 40s. We need to be doing that cardio. It's critical. But I digress. That aside, we need to factor in that that's already assuming you're doing cardio. And in fact, those numbers, you'll go look at someone like Alex Viada. There you go. There's you, an expert. Alex Viada, the writer of The Hybrid Athlete, the owner of Complete Human Performance. You go to his website for his various nutrition recommendations. He recommends that same amount of protein. Now, let's keep in mind, Alex himself is like a 220, 230 pound power lifter who competes in super marathons, triathlons, things like that. This is a guy who basically can run 30 miles and deadlift 700 pounds. These are his recommendations also. And again, he was doing his graduate work in biomechanics when he wrote all of that originally. So, good expert. successfully coaches hybrid athletes, people who compete in multiple different sports at the same time, meaning he'll take people who do powerlifting and marathon running and and train them to compete in multiple sports at once. He trains people for the CrossFit Games. Doesn't mean he does CrossFit, because he doesn't. You don't have to do CrossFit to go compete in the CrossFit Games or win them or make money doing it, so that's kind of the point. You just have to be able to successfully win the games. It doesn't require you to go do CrossFit training. So, those are the recommendations he had. But this idea that because you do extra activity that you need more protein is silly. Now, what you do need is more calories. What is the best source for those calories? More carbohydrates. People who engage in very high volumes of physical activity thrive in a higher carb environment. They're going to need more calories, more carbohydrates. That's what they really need more than more protein as a result of all this activity. Now, a lot of people are going to go, well, this athlete and that athlete follows a low carb diet and they're successful. And it's like, yeah, but they're not being successful because of their low carb diet. A low carb diet might be helping them to lose weight, but it's certainly not necessarily helping their performance always. Extra fat can help in your performance, but doing low carbs itself is going to do nothing for it. It's a good way to restrict caloric intake, which can control appetite, which can in turn control body weight and body fat loss. But it's not going to improve your performance in any way. And here's the caveat with that. For every single champion athlete you see, whether it's basketball or football or boxing or anything else out there, for every champion athlete you see who follows a low-carb diet or ketogenic diet while doing it, there are 100 of his contemporaries hanging with him who follow a very, very high-carb diet, a carb-dominant diet. So those exceptions to the rule who are doing it in spite of it, not because of it, can be overshadowed by the fact that for every one of them doing it, there's 100 people successful doing the exact opposite. Look at the law of numbers there. Most people are going to thrive in a higher carb environment, most athletes. That's just the reality of it. And even then, when it comes from another perspective of, well, some people do thrive in a ketogenic environment, but they're a minority of people. I actually do fairly well in a ketogenic environment, but the more I've messed with it, I tend to do better now in terms of performance, even when I experiment with it by sticking with higher carb, lower fat. But that's only if I keep the processed carbs to a minimal. I've got to eat pretty unrefined and whole carbs and avoid a lot of processed sugar and too much white pasta and white bread and things if I'm going to thrive. And that's the environment I thrive in, is slower digesting carbohydrates. My performance and energy tend to be better. Even then, now that I've really experimented with it a lot, but I can thrive in a ketogenic environment and lift max weights and everything else. I've done it. But a lot of people can't. Most are going to do better in a high carb environment. So there's your real answer. Do these athletes need more protein? No, they can stick to those same recommendations and up their carbohydrates. Or as Cali Muscle would say, up your carbs, player. All I did was up my carbs. You guys remember that imitation. I'm not going to get into all that with the soap suds again. But yeah, they need more carbohydrates. And the thing you have to remember, carbohydrates are not only better for performance, for athletic performance, they are themselves protein sparing. If you want to break down less protein so that you need to eat less protein in your diet to make gains, increase your carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are protein sparing, and calorie for calorie, they're going to give you better performance than protein will. So do these guys need more protein because they're doing all this extra activity and conditioning and sport-specific training? No, but they probably need a lot more carbs. And that's your real answer. Increase their carbs, not their protein. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.